Arsenal. Arsenal are for the most part a complete disaster, because the worst part is it's the hope that kills you. And it becomes a problem that the main thing that Arsenal fans have been known for the last decade was Arsenal Fan TV. And to have AFTV become somewhat of a showpiece for most fans showcase how much of a disaster they were. No one will forget Lockdown Arsenal. Willian, David Luiz, Mustafi, Socrates, Lacazette, and the list can generally go on. Now they're actually pretty decent. And after a season or two of playing some pretty nice football, they're now being questioned to be the same team as Stoke City. Incredible set pieces and over-reliant to one player. And in the last couple of years, they've tried and tried and tried again to win the Premier League, each time failing. Man City always beating them until City actually is not that good anymore. Surely they win the league. Oh, what phase is Arteta in? No one has any idea after winning pretty much nothing for the last 5 years, but hey, at least they came close and challenged for the title a bit and beat Real Madrid. No Premier League club will protect their player like Arsenal fans protect Bukayo Saka. If you ever say that he's not that good or even critique him, they will attack you and murder your family. And don't you ever talk about a conversation about the Premier League because they'll somehow make it about the Invincibles again. And if you do say the Invincibles wasn't the greatest team of all time, then again, they'll murder your family. Everton are like a old, lovable, nostalgic family car. It's been around forever, they've seen better days, and they break down a lot. But you can't help but love them in a way, hoping that it will never be sent down to the scrap. And every summer you convince yourself that eventually it could run perfectly again. Historically, Everton should be seen as one of the biggest clubs in England, because they historically are. 9 league titles, sadly, all won before colour television. On this planet, only 2 events have occurred, which has reached the 2 loudest decibeled recordings in history. One being the crowd of a Taylor Swift concert full of 60,000 the teenage girls who screeches your ears on TikTok, and the others being Goodison Park on a 3-0 down to Brentford and they booed the entire stadium down. Going from European consistency to kind of mid-table mediocrity to just purely god-awful relegation battles. But no matter how bad Everton get, you always know that they will stay up. Their main personality has been trying to beat Liverpool. They share the city of Liverpool, of course. Liverpool wins trophies, Everton win the moral high ground. They've now gone into a brand new stadium called the Bramley Moor Dock or the Hill Dickinson. That would definitely not be called the Hill Dickinson because it's literally called the Hill Dickinson. Hilly Dicky, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to go down well. Now the stadium is done, maybe they can actually spend a bit of money and actually not be poor. The years of Frank Lampard and Sean Dyche will go down in history as seasons that happened. Why Iron Man? I'm so sorry. Newcastle. Okay, I get it. I'll say it again. I lived in Newcastle for 2 years, okay? I know a bit of Geordie slang. Why Iron Man? I know, like, how do I describe Newcastle United Football Club and their fans? They love taking off their shirts in the winter. I don't get it. Newcastle, similar to Burnley and most northern clubs, are known for not having the nicest weather in the world. Newcastle fans are passionate and usually quite angry. Also happy that they're angry. They're hangry. If you say the word Mike Ashley to a Newcastle fan, they still may punch you. When Newcastle United weren't actually a football club, they were more like a front for Sports Direct. It was Sports Direct Football Club. One of my favourite stories was back in the mid-2010s with Jonas Gutierrez, who had cancer, survived it, and still played for Newcastle and helped them stay up in the Premier League against West Ham United on one of the final days. By far, in my opinion, one of my favourite footballing stories out there. And Newcastle became the ultimate nearly team for about 67 years, not winning a single piece of silverware, coming close in many cups and many different Premiership campaigns and never getting over the line. This all changed, of course, this year in the Carabao Cup, winning the EFL Cup against Liverpool and finally getting rid of that annoying guy's forehead that put that picture online. They were very much the sleeping giant of the Premier League. And then things changed. In 2021, they had a takeover by the Saudi ownership, who, to be fair, this was, I guess you could say, a bit controversial. You know, human rights records and, sports washing, and let's just forget about that. And hey, instead of signing Andy Carroll again, let's sign Kylian Mbappe. Eddie Howe came in, made them quite organised, and within 2 years, we're back in the Champions League. Job done. Basically, rags to riches, rags being Steve Bruce and riches being sports washing, with a good amount of Greg still fully involved. And I'm going to give you a rendition of my days back at university in Newcastle back in 2017. Rafa Benitez. Rafa Benitez. Brighton is again similar to a Brentford or a Bournemouth, where they are basically lower tier sides for the majority of the history, now living the high life. Similar to Bournemouth, they're in a seaside city with a bunch of tourists, and they've got more seagulls than what is morally acceptable. The stadium is in the middle of literally nowhere. I've been there, and the fact that the stadium is actually technically associated to a club in Brighton is actually comedic. And for the love of God, please don't try to park there. Let me explain to you Brighton Football Club. Find a talented player that no one's heard of from Ecuador, turn him into a world beater, and sell him to Chelsea for £80 million. Then repeat. Their owner, Tony Bloom, similar to Brentford, is also a professional gambler and poker player. And yes, another one of those football genius with spreadsheet types. But I do like their story. Back in the 90s, they almost pretty much died. They had no ground and they had no money. And the fans basically dragged their team back to life. Brighton at one stage were just like another club. However, in recent years, they've turned into a very attractive, vibey, kind of almost like a hipster type of club. Playing great football, having exciting players, and always having some kind of hipster manager. Until eventually they do too well and then Chelsea buys their entire club. Leeds. Leeds United is a club that I've come to respect quite a lot. As a fan that's gone to over 500 games in my lifetime, the amount of times I've gone to Burnley versus, I don't know, Middlesbrough, or Burnley versus Brighton, and randomly, there's a random chance of we all rate Leeds scum. And I don't know why, it just happens. And I imagine this could be the case for many teams across the country. Leeds United can be best described as a Ferrari, which is pretty old and is driven by a 2-year-old. Fast, high speed, brakes probably don't work, and it's going to crash anytime soon. Because historically, on the surface, Leeds always look like they're going in the right direction. They've always got a plan, there's always an idea, there's always something to get behind. Until it doesn't. Until they don't. Funnily enough, Leeds, founded in 1919, replaced Leeds City after they got booted from the Football League for financial problems. Yes, they even started their history of drama. Ellen Road, otherwise known as Hell itself, trust me, I've been to those toilets. And how can I describe Leeds fans? Loud, proud, bit deluded, and absolutely convinced that everyone in the football world is against them. Similar to Everton, when the times are good, it's really good. And when the times are sucking, it sucks. And then there's Marcelo Bielsa. I can't not talk about him in some way. Bielsa is like a genuine god to Leeds fans. If you talk to him in any bad way, similar to Arsenal fans, they will murder your family. Marcelo Bielsa turned him to a mediocre championship club at the time to basically running a lot and defending sometimes. And their history speaks for itself, winning many first divisions and even, in their own words, say that they're European Cup winners. Yes, they'd say that they've won the Champions League. This sense of injustice of why everyone must hate Leeds became a part of the club's identity. And then they were back in the Champions League back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then spent so much money they genuinely imploded in down to League One. Describing life at Leeds between 2004 to 2020 was basically the epitome of next year would be our year. Dodgy owners, random managers, and a lot of Italians. But now, yeah, they're pretty exciting. Burnley. Burnley is a conflicting club in recent years. Most people like them because they find to be a small northern club in England, fighting against the odds under Sean Dyche through grit and determination, getting results. Now they've changed a bit. Under Vizeh company, became what was basically a wet salad, trying to play like Manchester City against Manchester City and having the players of Preston North End. It didn't go well. Turf Moor, old school football ground that you kind of hate going to because it's always too cold. They have wooden seats and the base you get from the concourse is typically warm. And I'm saying that because I'm a Burnley fan, they typically are. No matter what, Burnley will always be seen as Sean Dyche's pet. Known for the typical kick it long, fight for everything, and nick a goal from a corner. And then Vincent Kompany came in and said, what if Burnley passed the ball? Which was a revelation, I must say. Now they're kind of in the middle of those two. Most fans probably don't like us, and most fans probably wouldn't even realise if we were even there. But I'm happy to be there. They have got something about them though. 2 league titles, 1 FA Cup, and founding members of the Football League. We will always keep reminding you every 5 minutes. Under their new American ownership, they are seen as much more of a hipster club. Believe it or not, they're putting in a podcast booth in the stadium. Having the likes of JJ Watt as the voice piece for the club and having documentaries out every 5 minutes, you'd feel like Sean Dyche didn't deserve to die for this. But this is Burnley, Cloughton Blue, otherwise known as the Purple Portion and Tropical Breeze. Yeah, that's the name of the colours on our kit now. Up the purples. Chelsea, 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 Chelsea. I kind of really just want to leave it at that, really. Chelsea, once upon a time, was just another club in London until a billionaire bought them in 2003 and turned them into the football's equivalent of a high-budget action film. Going from typical mid-table to maybe upper, just okay, to Champions League and, well, world royalty. The current motto at Chelsea is keep making up your tournaments, we'll keep winning them. And you can't even say this is incorrect. Make up the Conference League, they've won that. Make up Club World Cup, they've won that. As of we speak, they are the only club that's won really every trophy imaginable. They've won everything other than the Eurovision Song Contest. If you do go to Stamford Bridge, you'll find that most of their fans look like they still remember the Second World War, known as the oldest match-going fan base in the country. Let's talk about what's happened recently. Roman Abramovich, their owner, of course, bought them out and then sold them. The reasons behind that is probably a little bit conflicted. You know, politics, wars, not good things. Todd Bowley and the rest of his blue-collar group, and they had an idea, they had a plan, and their plan was, let's buy everyone. And they did. They bought almost every single young player they could find on Football Manager and see one compilation on YouTube and bought them for a stupid amount of money and then put them on a long contract, meaning that over time it doesn't seem as much as it would on paper. Policy is pretty simple. Identify expensive player, buy expensive player, sack manager when things go wrong in a year, and then buy more expensive players. They've genuinely, hand on heart, become every single person's Football Manager save when they sign every 18, 19-year-old on earth for 8 years and just see what happens. And the reality is, it's probably going to work. Because in the same story as every single Football Manager save I have, I always win the Premier League and the Champions League, and then I don't play again for 5 more years. Fulham are the Premier League team for people who wear scarves indoors, drink artisan coffee and have strong opinions about sourdough bread. Their fan base is by far the most remarkable and unique in the entire country. Type up Fulham away days on Twitter and you'll see a marvellous collection of cheese boards and wine. In the mid to late 2000s, Fulham, like Norwich, became a typical yo-yo club. Win a championship, get promoted, spend £100 million on players you never heard of, finish 19th, get relegated, repeat. But they're no longer that anymore. They have quite a bit of consistency, a bit of stability, and they're still quite posh. Fulham aren't really known for trophies. They're known as a nearly club in many aspects, with not really any trophies in their locker. The closest they've come was back in the Europa League final back in 2010, where they lost to Atletico Madrid. Of course, shocking the world by beating Juventus 4-1 along the way. Yeah, that Juventus. And pulling off one of the most famous great escapes in history. Big up Danny Murphy. They don't always win trophies, but they definitely win a trophy for the nicest stadium toilets in the league. Crystal Palace are named after an actual giant glass building from the Victorian era, which is kind of random. How's their fans? They're colourful and they're pretty loud. Known for having one of the more vibrant atmospheres in the country. Based in South London, even if you lose, they've got tons of jerk chicken shops. So, it's decent. For the last 10 or so years, they've been balancing between mid-table mediocrity and a mild relegation panic. On the odd occasion, maybe going a bit of a cup run, like they did back in 2016, but one step too far. Until, you know, they kind of went a bit mental. Crystal Palace are known as the ultimate party crashers. One week, they're failing to win in 5 games. The next week, they're beating Man City the Etihad. And at Palace, it is mandatory to have at least 2 players that can always be labelled as a streets won't forget player. However, they are changing a bit. They've won the FA Cup. They will never, ever, ever live this down. On top of that, they have just won the Community Shield as well. Going from basically 0 trophies in God knows how many years to now 2 in a matter of 3 months. This truly feels like the golden era of Crystal Palace Football Club. And also, I forgot to mention, their club badge is an eagle on a football. It's class. And due to the red and blue stripes, from an outside perspective, if you're from America, they can kind of always be kind of compared to Barcelona's hipster cousin. Oh god, can I do a Scouse accent? Okay. Course! Liverpool FC, otherwise known as that team that will remind you of every single time they won a trophy. Their motto, "You never walk alone," actually means you never say from a passionate Liverpool fan telling you about Istanbul 2005. I present to you one of the Liverpool lineups back in the mid-2010s. This is genuinely so pathetic it makes me want to cry. They actually had a front line of Mario Balotelli and Ricky Lambert in the Premier League at Liverpool Football Club. They got Jay Spearing, Coutinho, Jurgen Klopp, of course, a partner with Sadio Mane, Firmino, then Salah, and it all built together. Now, Coutinho is an interesting one because this is a running joke with Liverpool fan base called the Coutinho credit card. This means that the sale of Coutinho to Barcelona back in 2018 has led to a never-ending cycle of buying a bunch of players because of that money. That one sale basically set them up forever because immediately buying Van Dijk and Alisson in the same window was pure genius, and since then they've never looked back, and always insisting that being the most successful successful club is more important than being the biggest football club in comparison to Manchester United. And the shame is, in recent years, they should have had more. Being in 2 other European finals, losing both to Real Madrid, and in the Premier League under the Klopp era, we're always losing out to Man City unless if City falls apart. Klopp in that era only having 1 Premier League and 1 Champions League is a real shame. And just for Ownership to come in and win immediately is actually kind of offensive. Mo Salah, Bobby Firmino and Sadio Mane was just a much more vibier version of MSN at Barcelona. Their fans are, well, you know, they're Scousers, so you know what to expect with them. A bit of carnage. Just please, for the love of God, do not mention Steven Gerrard against Chelsea or Christian Ball. They may punch you in the face. Can I give a Brum accent here? Okay, Aston Villa? Villa? That sucks. Yeah, to be fair, in the mid-2010s, they were a complete disaster of multiple years of failure, leading to Julian Lescott accidentally tweeting a picture of his car from his phone after just losing another game. Villa, of course, were in the Championship, enjoying a lot of fun there, especially Jack Grealish, who got punched in the face at Birmingham. Villa has been known to annoy almost every single fan base. I mean, Christ, their goalkeeper is Emiliano Martinez. Aston Villa's like that old friend that's been around forever, but then reminds you that they used to be a big deal back in the day. Like, no, I didn't know that you won the Champions League back in 1982. I had no idea of this information. Let us just put the trophy in the middle of the players walking out to make sure that you don't forget. Historically, Aston Villa's quite a big football club, other than the period that Micah Richards was there. I always find it funny why Micah Richards never talks about them. Now these days, they're not quite elite, but you can never sleep on them. Qualifying for the Champions League and will be consistently back in European football thanks to my dad Unai Emery. But if you're looking for the best traditional stadium in the Premier League, you really cannot get much better than Villa Park. Oh yeah, and the club captain is John McGinn, who in reality looks like he's built like a fridge. Sunderland, of course, one of the most historic clubs in the entirety of England, with 6 league titles and became a staple of the Premier League. Very fast in the mid-2010s turned into that to becoming that club with a Netflix documentary that made you feel sorry for them. Season 2 of Sunderland Till I Die is still, to me, by a mile, one of the greatest pieces of television I've ever witnessed. It was remarkable. The stadium online is a ground big enough for 49,000 people, which is either rocking with passion or echoing with frustration and confusion. They have won quite a bit. The issue is, it was mostly back before the Titanic was still afloat. Sunderland became a cocktail of huge potential with chaotic decision making and fan loyalty that is so intense it borderlines on supernatural. Similar to Newcastle, I don't think they've got much else going on other than Greg's, so they just focus on football, and the club that became everyone's favourite football manager save is now back in the big time. And finally, the Tyne-Wear Derby is now back in the Premier League, which for me is the biggest derby in the entirety of England. Even the pigeons in the city centre take sides. AFC Bournemouth. AFC Bournemouth is like that kid that you saw at high school that was, let's be honest, a little bit of a loser and didn't have much going for him. And then 10 years later, you see him in a private jet and you're thinking, what the fuck? For the majority of people, they quite like Bournemouth. They're small, they're cute, they're innocent, they're harmless, they're like a bunny rabbit. Even the place they are from is adorable. A sunny seaside retirement town with the average age is I remember the war. The stadium, in comparison to most Prem sides, is like a shed. Of course, they are finally going to be improving this. In terms of silverware, have they won anything? No. Their biggest win is simply being part of the Premier League. It's like your local corner shop being part of the FTSE 100. They always play nice football, they're always nice in the eye, and they're relatively harmless. When they play against a top 6 side, they're always up for it and always get a good result. Everyone likes Bournemouth. Even their badge looks like a shampoo ad. Just grab the name and type in Weller, and then you're good to go. West Ham United, otherwise known as Irons. I think the best way to describe them is their stadium, which was borrowed from the Olympics after destroying their old home, Upton Park, that was knocked down to turn into flats. The identity of the club has shifted in the last couple of years, some in good ways, some in bad ways. For many West Ham fans, they feel like they've been portrayed to become a bit more of a touristy, plasticky football club. The identity they had at the bowling ground, or the Upton Park they would call it, has shifted quite dramatically. But they've won some silverware. Winning the Europa Conference League, he's without a doubt one of the proudest moments in West Ham United's history. When Jarrod Bowen went through on goal, I heard a screech down from London, and I lived in Poland at the time. But West Ham are relatively harmless. They've got troublemakers, occasionally brilliant, occasionally disastrous, and always somewhat entertaining. If that's maybe not on the pitch, usually it's off it. And they got some decent history. They won the FA Cup 3 times and famously provided 3 players and their manager to help England win the 1966 World Cup. And he mentioned it in every conversation ever since. since. Do you know Bobby Moore played for West Ham? No, I had no idea, mate. Their club anthem, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, is so incredible that it makes you forget that it's a song about sadness and broken dreams, which is kind of ironic. But West Ham, for the most part, is a club with a bit of identity crisis. For a club which is a very working class community, for a pub and pie spirit, going into a big shiny athletics track stadium just doesn't match the club they are. They want to be a bigger club, but not in this way. Manchester City, otherwise known as everyone's kind of second favourite team until they decided to win everything. Literally everything. The mood at City before 2008 was, well, we can beat United every once in a while. 2, let's collect every trophy ever created. Because before 2008, their history was, let's say, eccentric. They got relegated to the third tier in the late 90s. They still packed Main Road, their stadium at the time, with their fans, and famously found really weird ways to lose games when they were winning. Beating United felt like winning the World Cup to City. And then, from 2008 onwards, they had Pellegrini that looked like my dog nearly dead. They had Mancini that felt like he hated the weather there each day. And then they got Pep Guardiola that had a 200-page manual about how to pass the ball correctly, perfectly, every single time. And the worst part, they don't just win. They make 5-0 wins at the Etihad look like light jogging. That's been the last near 10 years for Manchester City. The history at City in the last 10-15 years is like going in a FIFA career mode save and then just giving all the players the maximum stats and finances possible. For the most part, City has now become football's final boss behind maybe Real Madrid. That if you want to beat them, you basically have to play the match of your life. The fan base at City is always known as the big talking point, City being labelled as the most plastic club in England. And if you are a new City fan, then I hate you, because life shouldn't really be that easy. City not winning any silverware last year was the first time in about 10 years. I just made that up, but it sounds about right. And historically, they have won a few trophies in the past too, so they weren't simply bought out from thin air. But yeah, City, inevitable. People pretend that they don't really care about them and say that people don't care if they win, but in reality, it just makes them care about them more. Oh yeah, and also, 115 charges on them still, and it's still not finished, is not going to be forgotten anytime soon. Nottingham Forest Football Club, the team that won back-to-back European Cups and spent 40 years non-stop talking about it. They're basically football's equivalent to that cool uncle that keeps telling you amazing stories and gigs he went on back in the 70s, and you can't even deny it or tend to shut up because it's actually true. Brian Clough rocks up, cracks some one-liners and turns Forest from a second-tier club to English champions in one season, and being the only team to win more European Cups than they have league titles. That's like having more Oscars than films you've starred in. Of course, since then they've declined. When they got relegated, Brian Clough left, and they slid away from the top with relegations, promotions, more relegations, and then a ton of championship mediocrity, even League One. Growing up, Forest became the epitome of championship stability. Very rarely being in the playoffs, but you never really thinking they may go down. But to be fair, they were always a pretty decent loyal fan base, 20 years in second tier and still packing out City ground. Big on tradition, big on noise, and big on reminding you on Brian Clough. They had an absolute maniac called Faraz as their owner back in the mid-2010s, and to describe how his time at the club went, the only legacy he has is a new big screen at the stadium. Then they got in Marinakis that somehow is a bit more mental, but at least he has good intentions. Wolverhampton Wanderers. Or Wolves, I guess. If you ever say that their kits look orange or amber, then you get punched in the face. It's clearly old gold. The recent history at Wolves has become a bit funny. They're a proud Midlands club based on tradition, grit, and signing every good Portuguese player in the world. It became so bad that their club's away kit genuinely was the Portuguese kit. Like genuinely yo-yoing between the top flight and the second division for quite many years, even in the third tier too. I will never forget Benny Caforbi. Of course, Nuno Espirito Santo arrived and immediately started punching above their weight, making the Europa League quarterfinals back in 2020, playing exciting, slick football with a Portuguese twist, becoming Premier League mainstays, usually mid-table, and usually giant killers. And a very cool colour scheme. Just please do not call them orange. Oh god. Oh, Jesus, what do I even say about these lot? Manchester United Football Club, otherwise known as the club that your mate supports despite never being within 200 miles of Manchester. Man United fans are like rats, you're never 5 metres away from one. Man United are football's ultimate paradox. They've been the biggest club in the world for decades, it feels like, and definitely the biggest in England, but yet all I hear about online now is how many engagements and likes they get on Twitter and how many shirt sales they get. United destroyed everyone's childhoods for the most part. I was born in 1998 and they were everywhere. But you may be surprised to hear that United has only ever had 2 successful periods, under Sir Alex Ferguson and under Sir Matt Busby. Under Busby they won 5 league titles, 2 FA Cups and a European Cup. Under Sir Alex they won 38 trophies, 13 Premier Leagues, 4 League Cups, 5 FA Cups, 2 Champions Leagues. Most of their success comes down to these 2 men. Fergie's biggest achievement wasn't just winning everything, but mentally destroying every manager while doing it. And then of course there's the era after Fergie, which, again, good example, putting a kid in a Ferrari, but instead of them driving a Ferrari, it's them driving a Ferrari with no wheels. They tried David Moyes, which was cute, was like my nan being manager of Man United, but was never going to be Fergie. Tried Louis van Gaal, that won the FA Cup, yeah, but made football like slow, boring, painful chess. Tried Jose Mourinho, he won a trophy or 2, but he tried to fight everyone. Tried Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, which was just pure vibes. Everton Hag, which was still trying to work out if it was a dream job or pure nightmare. And then Amorim, which I don't even know what Amorim's even meant to be anymore. However, there's the fans. The fans of Manchester United is what makes United who they are. They're loyal, they're global, they're huge, and they're very opinionated and very loud online. And still annoyed that Ronaldo came back and he was thrown away by Erik ten Hag. That, by the way, if you forgot, is bold. But without a doubt, no matter what happens at United, they are still, in my opinion, the biggest club in England. Despite how bad they are a fantastic joy to watch, constant chaos and desperately trying to relive their former glory days while their neighbours all quietly laugh. The slogan for Manchester United: hated, adored, never ignored. So Brentford are kind of like Bournemouth, but just a bit less liked. They're not disliked by any means, but people just kind of forget that they're there. They came to the Prem back in 2021 after spending most of their history in the 3rd tier. They have this thing called Moneyball, and they've been here ever since. This random approach that turns random obscure Danish blokes into Premier League nightmares. Every single part of the game is mastered in a way as if you think it's done on Football Manager, the set pieces and everything. They're already a step ahead of you. Speaking of the stadium, they did have Griffin Park, which was a traditional pub-heavy football stadium in England, and now turned into this thing, which looks more like it's made from a Lego set. It's not really a bad stadium, it just kind of looks like what you'd expect to find in the group stages of the Europa Conference League for some random team in Czech Republic. So Brentford, like Bournemouth, relatively harmless with an interesting story. The fact that their owner, Matthew Benham, who was a professional gambler with a maths degree, yes, that's true, took Brentford and said, what if we run a football club like a giant stats experiment? No silly money spending on big names, they buy undervalued players using data models and he's trying to sell them for profit. And that's the way Brentford is and will always be. Until one day people are expecting them to finally be relegated. Sorry lads. Tottenham Hotspur. I feel quite bad for Spurs fans. For most Spurs fans, I find that they are being bullied by almost every corner possible. However, things have finally changed. They won the Europa League. They won something. Like, Jesus. Their last major trophy was back in 2008. They've not been the winners of the main league since 1961. They've won the same amount of league titles as Burnley. However, prior to this, being a Spurs fan wasn't great. They always played pretty good football, always looked like they could maybe do something in the cups, and somehow always ended up being the punchline. They don't just get laughed at by their rivals, which is almost seemingly anyone in London. They also get laughed at by other top 6 clubs for being in that conversation too. Liverpool, United, City, they get involved too. Had some pretty good players like Harry Kane, like Heung-min Son, like Dele Alli, and when it matters, they always disappeared like Harry Kane does in the major final. But again, as I said, this is the history. They're now a new team now. They have a stadium which looks more like a spaceship that's a half football ground, half NFL theme park. Can they now be a bit more consistent and win some more trophies? Ange came out saying he always wins things in his 2nd year. He did that. He did the impossible. And then he got sacked, which is so Spurs, it's kind of funny.